Hi, welcome to Let's Talk About Love Stories from Everywhere. I'm your host, Jill Ferguson, and today with me is Sahba Aminikia, um, who is a dear friend and quite I was going to say inspiration, but I kind of find that word tends to be a little negative sometimes, right? But you've accomplished so much in your life, and you followed your passion and your heart, and that to me is just amazing. You are a music composer. You're an accomplished musician. You were a TED Fellow for a year. You are the founder and artistic director of the Flying Carpet Festival. The Flying Carpet Festival, and you just won an AgaCon Music Award this last year. And you've won some other awards and fellowships and residencies with top performing music organizations all over the world. And your music's been performed all over the world. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on my show.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So how did you get to this point in your life?
It's really difficult to imagine, because when I was growing up back in Iran, and that's where I grew up in Tehran, I never imagined what my life should be or look like. I just knew that I had this very internal feeling that I'm a musician, because I was playing piano since I was 8 or 9. I grew up in a family that my sister was an incredible person. Grew up basically it's from the previous generation of Iran, which, if you know the story of Iran and the revolution in 1979, she was part of the generation that they were burned during this revolution, because they were at the point that they were young and start to flourish, and then this crazy political event happens and it changes everything. Many of them, they were kicked out of universities. So it created a generation of very internalized, very classically educated young people that I had the pleasure of, being the brother of that sister. And she introduced me to everything in life, like music.
What's the age gap there?
There is the 10-year age gap,
Okay.
And she's the oldest and I'm the youngest. So I was always a person that she would hold the hand of and would take me to these intellectual centers in Tehran, many of which I really didn't understand. When you're starting watching Godard movies when you are 15, you really don't understand the depth of it to that extent. But it's, I remember as a child being exposed to this very high quality form of arts and cinema and music and every sort of performing art. It really establishes a sort of aesthetic in your mind that it stays with you until the end of your life. And I think that's what people call talent in music, in fact. Because talent is established by growing up in a household that people, treat arts and music like flowers in their homes. They just decorate their homes with that, starting from the morning. And there's a deep tradition of that in Iran. Growing up, waking up in the morning with certain music, and you go through the day with these sounds that are not necessarily broadcasted music, but they are musically inclined, like call of prayer and the sound of birds in the sky in Iran. When they wake up in the morning, there is just this rush of like circadians in Athens. You hear like a rush of sound from these birds that are significant. So you grow up with this beautiful, very organic sound in a civilization that has been in that region for 6,000 years consistently, so that creates layers and layers of cultural soil, in fact, on top of it, some of which we are not aware of as the new generation. So I always imagine that I'm growing up in a magical place, some place that is portrayed in 1001 Nights, in all these beautiful mythology, and I was very aware of that, because the cultural resources of Iran are just unlimited, and I hope for the world one day to be exposed to that depth of culture. It's just, imagine we are not completely aware of the Egyptian culture, for example, and the pyramids and everything. I wonder that Iran politically is in that state that is blockaded, but it's really the real treasure box of that area. There's so many layers, so many uh, different tribes and different kingdoms have ruled over that area and have left cultural marks. So growing up in an area like that, and the society also, by the way, itself has developed an underground culture, because growing up in an Islamic kind of dictatorship, you start to establish an underground community like everywhere else, and as it happened in the 60s here, or and in that circles, music and arts and everything is treated as some sort of drug that people use, because in any gatherings in Iran with my Baha'i friends, who, by the way, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do anything outside of the religious concept, everyone had, at least there were 2-3 guitars present in every gathering that I grew up with. So it was always music that was consumed by everyone and would bring people together. And also in the 80s, there was a huge oppression on Baha'is and minorities and communists and a lot of left-wing, activists. And basically there was a cleansing purge period of these people. So many people are getting killed. And as Baha'is, we gathered in these households that were large homes, usually people who had the resources, but people from all economics would gather there. They were only common trait was that they were Baha'is and they were experiencing the same social pressure. And in this environment, there were a couple of young people that they named themselves something, and they started to develop this artistic program. So every week we were there. So they would create like these series of mini theaters that they were connected. The stories were connected, and they would act it, and it was a comedy, and then there was music. So there was like a whole variety show, like a circus, in many ways.
Was it religious in nature, or was it?
All, some of them were original songs by musicians who were at the time songwriters, and of course they were talking about what's happening around them. But many of them, no, they were just escape for this type of people to not like feel that pressure less. And now when I look at all the protests happening in Iran, I feel the same spirit still exists, because when you are always under the pressure, you start to establish this dark basement for yourself in which you can light a candle, light a fire, and start to tell stories and jokes. And this happened during the Iran-Iraq war. When I was in Iran, my father was that person. When all our neighbors would gather in our basement, where was the only shelter, and with the candle holding, he would start joking with everyone and everyone was nervous and nervously laughing, But those are the moments that you really laugh, because it's so crazy, because people always imagine people who are getting bombed, they are, in their shelters crying. It's almost the opposite, because people in privileged societies are the ones they need this emotional encouragement all the time. And to me, seems like San Francisco, it's a beautiful city, but it's a more depressed city than the city I grew up in Iran. Because in Iran, we have nothing, so we make everything out of nothing, And here we have everything, and it's very difficult to entice people to engage in a real community action, which is not political. It's not taking advantage of them, or it's not a cult. It's not a political cult. It's not a religious cult. It's difficult because people don't need the sense of being together, and when you need that, when bombs are dropping on top of your city, that's when you need to get to that, what bring people together, So I'm kind of always attracted to these environments that there is this absolute lack of hope, and everything is dying. And I have become like this specialist of going into these areas and initiate something, But it all comes from the same suffering that many of the people around me were going through. And I just see myself as the fun uncle who can change the environment for a little bit,
Well, I feel like if you're in a society where, I won't say everything's handed to you, because I don't think it is that way here, but where you have access to a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
right? that limits your imagination.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
in some ways, having a limited imagination doesn't provide you with a lot of hope,
Absolutely.
because I feel like you need imagination for hope and to really be creative, right, in the ways that you are.
Absolutely. And you
Yeah.
need limitation as well. That's another, I think, secret technique of creating any sort of art, is that actually having multiple options is not. When I love when my, for example, performers kind of limit me in a certain concept or musical concept or philosophical concept, that gives me direction actually.
Mhm.
Because I think limitation gives you direction.
Yeah.
When things are unlimited, then the valuable things, they lose the value and color in a society. You
Yeah.
know, I can go to a record store here, and anything that is produced after 2000 is above $40. But anything that is actually comes from the real cultural values that the United States holds is less than $5. In fact, you
Yeah.
know? You know?
It shows
For
where we
me,
are with our value system for sure.
absolutely. So for me, coming from like a society that was actively blockaded culturally, and that made us very hungry, it's like heaven. You know, I walk into a record store and I buy every classic that I want to buy for less than $20. Or we have free libraries here, which are incredible. The public library of San
Mhm.
Francisco is just a treasure box sitting there, you know,
Yeah.
and it's not that crowded, honestly, I have to tell you. So this is these are the, I think, advantages, as for example, the persecuted Jews after the World War II, they experienced in the United States, and that's why their societies developed so much, because these people coming from such horrendous events in Europe, they knew the value of free college and free library, and that's
Mhm.
what created a generation of Jewish people who are extremely educated and extremely, people who have a statement in life. You know,
Yeah.
uh, I think we have seen this throughout the history many times. It's just we are in the modern times that that generation of people also have changed to newer generation who are grown in the comfort. Actually, they
Mhm.
were raised in comfort. So when you talk to older people, as someone who fled Iran in 2006, I communicated with these old emigres from Europe much better, from in any background. They
Yeah.
are Armenian Jews, you know. They went through the exact same experiences that. So that's how my connection with music started with Dmitry Shostakovich, actually,
Mm.
because he also was an artist in a totalitarian society, and his music was actually very much promoted in in Iran at the time, part of the Soviet culture that was dominant there. But I just loved this self-expression, this secret self-expression within something that is accepted by the state.
Well, and I'm going to quote from your website here, and I'm going to read it off this piece of paper to make sure I get it right. But you say on your website that the dichotomy between light and dark to you is clear, or yeah, clear. Yet through music, that you want to find the moment where the former emerges, the light into the darkness. And I think that's what you were talking about. I mean, even being in the cellar, right, or the basement, and
Absolutely.
having that candle in the light and making jokes and bringing music, and that you, I know that you say in your TED talk about the part of the reason you started the Flying Carpet Festival, and we'll talk about what exactly that is and what it does in a second, was because that you wanted to help children who were suffering from adult decisions. And
Absolutely.
oh my gosh, that just hit me so hard, because
Yeah.
that's what war is, right?
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
it's very easy to blame it on one side. In any context, academic context, colonial studies, it's extremely easy to see things one-sided. And the fact is that it's a combination of things that make things so difficult that it almost paralyzes humanity to the point that they refuse to respond to, for example, killing of 20,000 children in Gaza, you know? And that's not because they are evil or something. It's just that we are in a world that we are surrounded by information, that information gives us identity in a way. But I think when our reaction to everything is just on a human rights basis, in fact, and then we start to forget what government thinks and what they support and what they don't support. We would support the rights of women in every community, no matter if United States policies is behind it or not. We would support the uprising of young people for democracy anywhere in the world and towards secularism and toward democratization, no matter what government supports it or not, because we cannot, our moral ground when it's hijacked by the politicians, that's kind of where we are right now. And that's where the society is so rough and unpoetic, in fact. And in this type of society, we need people who are more unifying and more about bringing people of every way of thinking together. Because I saw the transformation of so many of my friends here in San Francisco, which is the most liberal location in the United States. But I saw their transformation to something completely different and vice versa, you know. So, and they are still my friends, in fact, actually. So there is a possibility of a human connection being beyond the political or religious or ethnic or racial identity. And this sort of artificial identities, in fact, such as race, religion, nationality. In fact, that's what stops us from feeling other people in other parts of the world. For me, what's important is the psychological health of children, because what's creates the next generation of people that I myself have to deal with are these children, in fact. And instead of right now arguing with a large group of traumatized people from all around the world, you can always invest in the next generation who are not as traumatized. And there is a way for them to see things less seriously. Honestly, that's what I'm trying to promote. In fact, everyone takes themselves too seriously, and this is like spiritually, philosophically, in every aspect, it's wrong. In fact, I don't think any early creators or early philosophers, early mystics, even in the East, they had so much prejudice on what they are promoting, even Jesus Christ, compared to their followers today, because it's just almost insane, in fact, actually. And using the name of people who have been idealists all throughout the history for your own political or financial gain, that's become the currency of the time, no matter where you belong in the political spectrum. So for me, I'm creating a playful place for children, and specifically from that part of the world, because I am from that part of the world and I understand the issues that exist there in a real sense. But we would always love to go to other continents. But what I'm promising actually to create this consistent cultural hub and festival that can travel, and that's what our plan is for the future, to expand to several countries. That one day, for example, we would move along the Silk Road and we will go from one place to another place, and all the children would hear from us. And I hope thousands and millions of projects like this would be created out of this project, not by us, by other people.
So you've, according to the numbers that are out there, you've interacted with about 400,000 children, right? Let's talk about what exactly, for anybody who doesn't know, what is the Flying Carpet Festival? How long has it been in existence? What exactly are you doing, where and where?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the Flying Carpet Festival is basically one of first, or maybe the first, mobile arts festival for children living in conflict zones and areas that are dangerous, because these are the areas that are getting mostly isolated from outside world, and that's what makes them more and more dangerous. By observing the needs of the children in that region and the sicknesses that exist in that region, and what the lives of these children can lead up to when you evacuate the country out of 20 million people in Syria, for example, and then basically the faith of these generations are just in the air, and the media stops talking about certain wars because politically they are over or diminished, but in fact this leaves generations of traumatized and very violent people, in fact, actually. And that is something that if this happened in the In the heart of Marseille also, it would have created the same type of people. The children in our region and the sicknesses in our region, such as extremism, are the product of certain events in our region. That if you look at the history of the Middle East and the North African MENA region, for the 20th century, there hasn't been a moment that there was not at least 3 wars are happening at the same time. And these are the interests of the Soviet Union, United States. Everyone were fighting their wars in this region. And of course, it creates a lot of young people that are seeking identity. They don't have role models. And, that's what makes basically a fertile soil for extremist religious groups and violent groups to recruit, basically. That's kind of a never-ending cycle, in fact. Because when children, for example, when I look at young people in Gaza, which I'm extremely against groups like Hamas in Gaza, not for political reasons, but for the fact that they deceive young people into a one-way solution, and which is armed for basically struggle. And this armed struggle always leads into oppression and genocides, and that's the reality. If you take guns against any government, you give the right to, they give the justification to government to. Actually, that's why a lot of main figures in Israel, they support this sort of extremist group underneath the politics, because this is where you can justify evaporating, like eliminating an entire group of people, because there is a small group of fanatics and terrorists, and they just use young people. They use them as literally just objects in order to gain political gain. And that's what I'm against. I feel, in fact, Palestinian struggle, for example, can be far more influential and stronger when they produce people like Edward Said, or poets or musicians, and that's how you can bring nations together, in fact. Because eventually there is no way for anyone to leave that region. They are there, and everyone has roots, and they have the right to stay there as much as we have ownership over this earth as a land, So I belong to the certain groups that are very small, but they believe in negotiation and peace and bringing people together. So this is for me, a lot of justification behind Flying Carpet Festival was, in fact, actually bringing peace and end to tribalism in that region through culture. So imagine there are several groups who are militant and they take guns. Literally, we take musical instruments, and we are the same. Why not? Why that type of people exist, that they give their life for violence? Why shouldn't people exist that they give their life for music and arts? And that's a beautiful way of, I think, every life story. That if well, everyone dies, but imagine we die in a moment that you are bringing music and light and magic to a place. That's just incredibly inspiring. Anyway, so this festival became a 12-day festival today. It started in 2018, and we, in collaboration with an organization in Turkey, which is a social circus school that works with traumatized children and teenagers. And I learned about them in San Francisco through their international volunteers. And I traveled in 2018-17 to Mardin, and I spent a day in Mardin, and the founders, they showed me all these magnificent places, and there was so much possibility. It's just, when you are in the Western countries, you feel like there is a gigantic structure that you just have to fight and, prove that you exist and you're a human and you have a culture. And then in the end, you realize that this is all established by some militant colonial mentality that will not change and will just use you as basically another color in their spectrum of color. So for me, it was such a relief that I can look at something like a child. Now, instead of being in this gorgeous room with video games and everything that everyone is fighting over every controller, I can go to a room that there are children that they just don't have a book to read even, and I'm the only fun person there, and I have a piano and I can create something, and every aspect of it, every step of it, I can design and align with my morals, with my and in a way kind of creating a statement what a cultural event should look like actually everywhere, not only in the war zones, but in the United States also. I think total culture industry here is a failure, and it has no impact on politics whatsoever. It just polarizes people more often. But these organizations like San Francisco Symphony, New York Philharmonic, they were created in the beginning to be part of community actually, and they had these golden eras. But now they are at the bottom because they just rely on the very rich donors, and they don't target, so they don't have a definition for underprivileged people. Yeah. They think underprivileged people are the people who are already coming to Symphony, which is absolutely not true. So even in San Francisco, there is definitely a discrimination and an inequality in receiving cultural opportunities for children. Mm-hmm. The children who come from lower economics, they are just exposed to literally garbage on TV and basic cable and a lot of like very cheap pop culture. And the children who have the resources, have the parents who would pay like $200, $300 for Symphony, they can take them to Symphony regularly. So this inequality exists everywhere, in fact. Yeah. And I'm not trying
especially with the music programs being cut from schools and the art programs and everything else, right? Because politics have said where the funding goes, and that's not to that.
Absolutely, because they are creating a project. Like this is the typical creation of a project here in the West. Then you come up with a proposal and you send it to a donor, and they would approve it, and you implement it. But the reality of projects for underprivileged communities is that first you have to find a root in that community. So, in fact, I believe in many years of going without a budget or with a very small budget until you are morally, philosophically, and artistically you're certain and your concept is proven, then you can invest in it substantially. And bringing capital into these projects that are not fully developed spiritually and artistically inside that community, in fact, promotes more corruption, in fact, actually, because it creates programs. And this exists on a local nonprofit and it exists on an international nonprofit also scene, that it basically makes the organizations very ineffective. And this is true about many children, international children organizations that we have a very positive perception of because they have good marketing, actually. But in fact, actually, when I arrived in Mardin with billions of dollars being poured into that region, the lowest quality of events, behavior, lack of respect towards the refugee communities, these are very common, and there is no supervision. There is a lot of waste, actually, in a lot of sectors of the humanitarian sector in international. Gigantic salaries and security teams that are absolutely unnecessary if you are from that region. So if you are a European coming to that war region, you would receive a gigantic salary with a security team and you never leave the building. Can you believe that? Majority of humanitarian organizations, their leaders or their coordinators, they never leave the building that they're working in. So they're advised to not to. We are actually the first organization in that sort of zone that we allow our artists to go inside the community bazaar and talk to people and enjoy, and most of them they see it as the very beautiful trip that every year they're experiencing. So there is a lot of weakness, and that's why in the politics you see they are under attack. And I think there is always truth to every side of the political spectrum to some extent. Actually, sometimes always it's exaggerated. But if, for example, an immigration doesn't exist, the issue does not exist in the US, then this polarization didn't exist. So that issue should be addressed. It cannot be completely rejected as a political ideology, Then this creates more and more polarization because two sides are not listening and they're just deaf towards each other and shouting at each other what they think. And it creates a lot of people who don't necessarily process the information in a dynamic manner. They just repeat what they heard. And that's why they're not able to answer the second sentence. So it's just a crazy flow of false information and uneducated comments on every side that is dominating, and those comments are more louder in the society, I think, because they bring more interaction in social media. It's just that this shouldn't stop us from connection to the truth that if we had a Syrian neighbor, for example, in our house in Minnesota, for example, we would treat them actually with ultimate respect. Most Americans do, actually, you know. They would bring pastry to you. They would start a relationship as a neighbor, you know. And that's also our culture. It's not very foreign to our Eastern culture. That's actually exactly what. But when we always live in the abstract and we see refugees as we have a picture of one refugee as you know, portraying the image of millions and billions of people, then it starts to create polarization.
And don't you think that at the heart of that polarization, it's really fear-based?
Absolutely, and this fear is injected by the politicians because they want to rule, in fact, over this. But right now, this is an interesting point in history, because in the United States, actually, the ultra extreme left and ultra extreme right, and even not ultra, just left and right on both sides, are actually finding more common grounds with themselves rather than their politicians, you know. So, for example, there is a lot of awareness today about the role of Israel in the politics of the United States. And you see that there is a discontent generally about this concept. And this goes with the nationalism of the right, and this goes with the pro-Palestinian concept of the left, in fact, actually. And honestly, it creates a more nuanced mixture rather than imagining the politicians who represent two sides. And they look like enemies, and they hate each other, and they throw all sort of garbage at each other, and they question each other's family life, which all of these are extremely immoral on both sides, in fact. So I think the way that, for example, in this country, Trump was treated, in fact, in the media, helped him and supported him to become a larger winner in the election, actually. Because every method was so unethical. Methods are so unethical because they affect us as implementers of those methods. When we talk about someone's private life or bring someone's wife into a political spectrum or someone's child into a spectrum, we are killing something in ourselves first, you know, some sort of ethical line, actually. And that's true about everything in life, in fact, honestly. That's why I think it's important to treat people with respect, because that's how we inside ourselves respect that much, actually, that there's a correlation between that. So, but the project that we created, I'm coming back to Flying Car, it was really a concept that I wanted people, and we have that kind of spectrum. We are not kind of like a hippie left-wing kind of a humanitarian project. We bring people of every kind. Some of them are really difficult to put together in a collective, but creation of art in our festival is parallel to creation of community, that people have different opinions, because speaking of politics, religion, and certain every ideology, actually, in our festival is prohibited, actually. So people, all the artists, we are an artist residency. We bring 50 artists every year from 20 different countries, and they create a storytelling experience from scratch together in the course of 3 days, and then they tour it 9 days across the region in different underprivileged areas. There's extreme, it's very intense, it's very difficult. These people are perfectionists, all of them are professionals, and makes it very difficult too. But I think if artists cannot work together and cannot establish a connection, then the world is really doomed, in fact, because these are the people whose art and religion and nationality is art, is in fact, actually. It's not, they don't have a religion, they don't have politics, they don't have, this underground, you know, kind of platform for artists from all around the world that can come and experience being in a real situation and working with people who have a common purpose together and working under very intense physical conditions, lack of water, electricity sometimes, where a lot of difficulties, and psychologically coming out of it as a new person. That's the goal that we are trying to promote here. So we are not just a children festival, and of course that's our main goal to outreach, because I see a lot of festivals that are incredibly philosophically interesting, but they don't have an impact on underprivileged communities. That's what we are. We are trying to create something that is as beautiful and creative, but eventually has a purpose. And really, that is what changes the dynamics inside our collective throughout 8 years, basically.
Well, and you made a comment at some point that probably during the TED Talk that says only through love is education possible. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so talk a
I
little
learned it
bit
from
more
you,
about
Jill,
that.
as my teacher, as my professor, No, actually, you were actually, and I'm not saying this because you're in front of me. This is something that has remained in my mind. You are one of very few professors that I had that some taught me that actually education is something beyond technical abilities. And you and Dr. Hoffman, I can tell you, had magnificent impact. And interestingly, you are not musicians, both of you. And
No,
that
and
was
we're very,
so
Dr. Holman,
fantastic.
Nicholas and I are very good friends. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
But the fact is that
yeah,
poetic core that connects all of art and philosophy and archaeology and literature together, that is what we are lacking in our educational system. The people who have that kind of poetic mentality, in a very cliche way, a dead poet society kind of character.
yeah,
We constantly need that. It's not something that happens once and we make a movie about it. We need that in our societies more than information, actually. Information is available everywhere right now,
yeah.
but perception and look at everything through empathy. And I remember, for example, Dr. Hoffman had this sentence, on a small note, like a sticky note on his above his desk, that wisdom is love is the largest wisdom. And as a child coming from an area like that, and these are the type of things that inspires me, in fact, actually. And in fact, it's just very practical, very pragmatic. When two people, you leave them in a room and they hate each other, they can never agree on anything.
Yeah.
But when people love each other, they submit to things that they would never agree to do that. And that's the magic of love. In fact, that's what transforms humans, even through any sort of love. When you fall in love with someone, because their love in your heart is so strong that you forget about everything you have learned. It kind of becomes an unlearning process of yourself. And that's the humbling and the submissive part of art. I don't want to use submissive, but it's actually in Islam, in essence, it means actually submission, in fact. So submission to something greater than yourself. And then that person is able to change you. And you change through just being exposed to something as great as yourself and beautiful. And then this combination kind of emerges you and like in water, your sugar in the water, and you become a larger quantity of sweet things together, and it's more impactful, in fact. So that's I think what love drives in people. As a professor, as an educator, I think what you can teach children as a parent, what's most important, actually, coming from an area that children have tons of issues, love, giving them love is more important than buying them shoes, even, and teaching them how to love. This is what successful families in refugee tents have implemented in their own families. They give their children love, and you can see that child has a different future. But the children who receive everything and they still don't receive that source of empathy in their life, those are the most miserable ones, in fact, actually, in the future, both in very poor societies and very privileged societies.
Yeah, I agree with that. As I said at the beginning, you and Flying Carpet Festival won the Aga Khan Music Awards this past year. Did that make an impact on the work that you're doing? How did that impact your life?
Absolutely. It's very recent. So both TED and Aga Khan, it's a fellowship, which means that you become part of the community for life. And both of them are very resourceful, magnificent, talented people. Aga Khan, in our region, it's a magnificent organization that everyone would love to work with. Their root goes back to the Ismaili religion, which is actually part of Islam, but They are actually a small group of actually actually they're not that small. They're huge internationally, but they're not that known. These Ismailis, they don't promote religious concepts. They focus on cultural concepts. So they run and support millions of humanitarian projects and cultural projects all around the world. And what makes them significant is the quality of their work. So, for example, a lot of projects that Kronos Quartet here accomplished was through our Khan Foundation, and they connect musicians from the eastern part of the world to the western part of the world. In fact, this mentality was very much promoted by Dr. Edward Said, who taught at Columbia, the Palestinian scholar. And it was always misrepresented in the West, because the concept is not about putting East and West in front of each other, even the concept of decolonization. The concept is not about putting two fronts of East and West together. It's actually proving that they are the same thing, in fact. And the concept of East and West was created by colonial powers, because when Europeans came to that continent and they had no understanding of the culture in a very miserable way, and that created Orientalism of 19th century, that created almost like a other feeling, that there are people on that side of the world that they people. I used to tell my colleagues and my children, the young people that I used to go to school with, to conservatory, that in our high schools in Iran they teach us how to read palms and ride flying carpets. And honestly, 100% of them believed what I was saying. And in fact, they were saying that, oh, our educational system here in the West is a failure because you learn all these cool techniques, This is the concept of other. And you think that really, but if you realistically look at the most, like you go to south of Africa or west of Africa or to come to the United States, generally people are living in the same manner, actually. I grew up in Iran listening to a lot of Western products. I grew up with Queen and Pink Floyd, and my favorite music is the top of people. And I learned about classical Iranian music later, actually. And everyone expects me to be here to be that image of that exotic culture. But in fact, actually, people are looking at the United States. People eat like Mexican food, Indian food. There are Indian, Mexican restaurants in Tehran today, many of them actually. So that concept that we always think that the other side is something that we don't understand and we are not allowed to talk about it. And political correctness has also provoked this mentality that people are afraid of bringing up questions and asking stupid questions, which is the essence of knowledge and learning, in fact. I'm very much against political correctness. And I believe I'd rather, as a brown person, to hear very offensive words rather than people hiding their true beliefs, because that's how you cannot connect as humans in a deep level. So that created a sense of otherness, which has resulted in, you can see roots of it in culture, in politics, in everything. And if the other side are just these people that it's okay if we just get rid of 2 million of them, and their world becomes a better. That's how Nazis thought of Jews during the World War II. That's the dehumanization that happens.
Well, not just Jews, right? It was the people that were handicapped. It was the musicians. It was the people who were of various other sexual persuasions, and it was so many people.
That's where we go. In fact, actually, we go toward purization of society according to our own imagination. Then it becomes so boring that starts to bore our own young people, So that's the problem with a lot of totalitarian societies. They just become boring. They just repeat the same propaganda over and over again. So that's why they usually start to corrupt from within, actually from the core, because by themselves they are not sustainable. The beauty of humanity is in diversity and colorfulness, The same vocabulary that people use today towards immigrants or Muslims or African people, this was the same vocabulary that we used towards, Jewish people, Italians, Greeks, Irish people, everyone has experienced it. And it still doesn't get boring, it's still not the same. That's the problem in the United States. We need more creativity here, honestly. Even in the politics, both left and right, for it to become more interesting, honestly, because boredom usually leads to evil thoughts.
it certainly lacks creativity. We're running out of time here, but I want to let people know that if they want to check out the Flying Carpet Festival, it's flyingcarpetfestival.org. That your full name, first name, last name is also a .com if they want to see the work that you're doing. And I know that before we got online here live, that you had just said to me when I had asked about the pronunciation of your last name, that the Amini part of it means person of honesty. And I believe wholeheartedly that we've had a very honest discussion, and I thank you for that today.
Good.
For not mincing words and for telling us, what your worldview looks like.
For educating me to be one.
And I just so appreciate the work in spreading love and spreading arts to people who need the sunshine in their world more than they have it regularly. Absolutely. So that's amazing.
We all need it. Thank you so much for this conversation. Very
Thank
fun.
you.
Thank you.